In a quiet village, nestled at the base of a towering mountain, life unfolded at its own gentle pace. Among the villagers, a young man stood out, not for his talents or achievements, but for his laziness. While others toiled in the fields and workshops, he spent his days stretched out under the same tree, dreaming of a life that required no effort. One day, a wandering monk entered the village. His serene presence brought both curiosity and respect from the locals. However, the monk's attention soon turned to the young man, who seemed permanently glued to his spot beneath the tree. The monk's curiosity was piqued, and this marked the beginning of a transformation neither could have anticipated. In the warm glow of the afternoon sun, the village bustled with activity. Farmers tilled their fields, blacksmiths hammered metal into tools, and children ran through the narrow streets, their laughter filling the air. Amid this scene of industrious energy, there lay one exception. A young man sprawled lazily beneath a sprawling banyan tree, as though the weight of the world rested solely on his shoulders. The monk, dressed in simple saffron robes, entered the village that day. His weathered face and calm demeanor radiated a wisdom that seemed to command attention without words. As he made his way through the village, he noticed the young man lying motionless under the tree. Day after day, the monk returned, and each time he saw the same sight: the young man asleep, oblivious to the hustle and bustle around him. Curiosity got the better of the monk. One afternoon, he approached the young man, who was half awake and lazily swatting at a fly. "Why do you lie here all day while others work so hard?" the monk asked gently. The young man opened one eye and gave a half-hearted shrug. "Why should I bother? Working in the fields is exhausting. Besides, I'm perfectly happy right here." He stretched and yawned, as if the conversation itself were too much effort. The monk smiled and lowered himself to sit beside the young man. "Happiness, you say? Do you think happiness can last without effort to sustain it?" The young man laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that masked indifference. "Effort? Why waste energy when I can enjoy the shade of this tree and the breeze on my face?" For a moment, the monk said nothing, his eyes scanning the distant mountain that loomed over the village. "Tell me," he said finally, his voice calm but probing, "do you ever dream of being rich?" At this, the young man's ears perked up. He sat up slightly, his curiosity piqued. "Rich? Of course. Who wouldn't want to be rich? But riches don't come to people like me." The monk's eyes twinkled with a hint of mischief. "Ah, but what if I told you there's a way, a certain path to wealth that even you could follow?" The young man leaned forward now, his laziness momentarily forgotten. "What do you mean? What kind of path?" The monk pointed to the towering mountain that loomed in the distance. "Beyond that mountain lies a cave. Inside, there's a diamond so precious that it would make you the richest man in the world. But to claim it, you must climb the mountain and reach the cave." The young man's gaze followed the monk's finger to the mountain. For a moment, he was captivated by the promise of wealth. But soon, his usual lethargy crept back in. "Climbing that mountain? It looks impossible. Surely there's an easier way." The monk chuckled softly, his tone both amused and firm. "If you seek ease, then stay here beneath your tree. But if you truly desire the diamond, you must rise and take the journey yourself. No one can do it for you." The monk stood up as if to leave, his robes swaying in the breeze. But before he could take a step, the young man called out, desperation and curiosity warring within him. "Wait, are you telling the truth? Is there really a diamond?" The monk paused and turned back, his gaze steady. "The diamond is real, but its worth is not just in its brilliance. You will understand its value only if you take the journey to claim it." Something in the monk's words struck a chord. The young man's heart, buried beneath layers of apathy, stirred with a strange new feeling. Hope. For the first time, he felt the pull of something greater than the comfort of his tree. Slowly, hesitantly, he got to his feet. "I'll go," he said, his voice uncertain but resolute. The monk smiled, a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. "Then go with courage. The path will not be easy, but it will be worth it." As the young man set his sights on the distant mountain, the villagers watched in quiet amazement. The boy, who had always seemed destined for nothing, had taken his first step toward a journey that would change his life forever. The young man stood at the base of the mountain, staring up at the towering peak that seemed to pierce the clouds. The sheer size of it was intimidating, the winding path ahead steep and uneven. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if the monk had lied? What if the diamond wasn't real? But then he remembered the monk's calm assurance and the tantalizing promise of unimaginable riches. With a deep breath, he took his first step. The path was far from welcoming. Loose gravel shifted under his feet, and jagged rocks jutted out at awkward angles. After just a few minutes, his legs ached, and sweat trickled down his forehead. He stopped to catch his breath, glancing back at the village below. It seemed so small now, a distant and comfortable world he had willingly left behind. "This is harder than I thought," he muttered to himself. But then, a cool breeze swept through the trees lining the path, carrying with it a faint scent of pine and wildflowers. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the breeze soothe his tired body. Something stirred within him, a faint spark of determination. As he climbed higher, the challenges multiplied. Thorns tore at his clothes, and the uneven terrain tested his balance. More than once he stumbled, scraping his hands and knees. Frustration bubbled up inside him. Why am I doing this? What if the diamond isn't even there? But each time doubt threatened to overwhelm him, he thought of the monk's words. The diamond is real, but its worth is not just in its brilliance. What did that mean? He didn't know, but the mystery intrigued him, pushing him to take another step and then another. Hours passed, and the young man's progress was slow but steady. The sun climbed high in the sky, its rays beating down relentlessly. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but the higher he climbed, the more breathtaking the view became. Below, the village looked like a tiny patchwork of rooftops and fields, and beyond it, the horizon stretched endlessly, bathed in hues of gold and blue. For the first time in his life, he felt a sense of awe, not just at the beauty around him, but at his own ability to reach this height. The thought filled him with a strange pride. "I've made it this far," he whispered, almost in disbelief. "Maybe I can go even further." The path grew steeper as he neared the summit. His muscles burned, and every step felt like a monumental effort. Yet, something had changed. The complaints that once filled his mind were now replaced by a quiet determination. He no longer thought about the diamond as much as the challenge itself, the climb, the struggle, and the small victories with each step forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the peak. The air was crisp and cool, and the world below stretched out like a vast, living map. He stood there, catching his breath, his chest heaving from the exertion. For a moment, he forgot about the diamond entirely. The view was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The mountains rolled into the distance like waves frozen in time, their peaks kissed by wisps of cloud. Rivers sparkled like silver threads winding through valleys, and the sky seemed impossibly vast, a canvas painted with soft streaks of sunlight. As he stood there, the young man felt something he couldn't quite put into words. a mix of accomplishment, humility, and wonder. This is incredible," he murmured. But his journey was far from over. Beyond the peak lay the descent, and somewhere on the other side of the mountain was the cave that held the diamond. He looked down at the winding path that led into the dense forest below. It was steep and shadowed, a stark contrast to the open expanse of the summit. He hesitated, the doubts creeping back. The descent looked even more perilous than the climb. He could turn back now, return to the village, and at least say he had made it to the top. But the thought of giving up gnawed at him. "I've come this far," he told himself. "I can't stop now." With renewed resolve, he began his descent. The path was narrow and slippery, forcing him to move slowly and carefully. The rocks were sharper here, and loose dirt threatened to give way under his weight. More than once, he lost his footing, tumbling and scraping his arms. Each fall left him bruised and battered, but he refused to stop. As he continued, the forest around him grew darker and denser. The air was thick with the scent of moss and damp earth, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filled his ears. The journey was no longer just about the diamond. It was about survival, about proving to himself that he could endure. Step by step, stumble by stumble, he pressed on. The thought of the diamond lingered in his mind, but it was no longer his sole motivation. Each step he took was a victory over his own doubts and fears, a testament to a strength he never knew he possessed. Finally, through the thick trees, he saw it, the mouth of the cave. It was dark and unassuming, its entrance partially hidden by vines and overgrowth. Relief and anticipation surged through him as he staggered toward it, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made it. Despite the pain, the fear, and the doubts, he had made it to the cave. The promise of the diamond awaited, and with it, the culmination of a journey that had already begun to transform him. The young man stood at the cave's entrance, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and exhaustion. The dark, gaping mouth of the cave seemed to beckon him forward, yet a sense of unease crept over him. He hesitated for a moment, his tired body screaming for rest, but the thought of the diamond pushed him on. He took his first step into the cave, the cool air within a stark contrast to the humid forest outside. Shadows danced on the jagged walls as faint beams of sunlight filtered through cracks above. His footsteps echoed eerily, the sound amplifying his every movement in the cavernous space. "This must be it," he whispered to himself, his voice trembling with both excitement and fear. His eyes darted around, scanning every crevice and corner for a glimmer of the promised treasure. He ventured deeper, his hands brushing against the rough walls as he moved cautiously through the narrowing passage. The deeper he went, the darker it became. He fumbled with a small torch he had carried in his satchel, lighting it with trembling hands. The flickering flame illuminated the way ahead, revealing more of the cave's intricate formations. Stalactites hung like ancient teeth from the ceiling, while pools of water shimmered in the faint light. Minutes turned into what felt like hours as he searched every corner, every nook, and every hidden space within the cave. His torchlight bounced off rocks and walls, but there was no sign of the diamond. Frustration began to bubble up inside him, replacing the excitement that had driven him this far. "Where is it?" he muttered under his breath. "The monk said it would be here." He retraced his steps, scanning each area with increasing desperation. He scoured the ground, peered into tiny crevices, and even dug into loose piles of rubble, but the result was always the same: nothing. Finally, he slumped against the wall, the torchlight flickering weakly in his hand. The silence of the cave seemed to mock him, amplifying his failure. His mind raced with anger and confusion. Had the monk lied to him? Was this all some cruel joke? I climbed that mountain. I risked my life. And for what? An empty cave? He exclaimed, his voice echoing back at him. He closed his eyes, his head resting against the cold stone. For a brief moment, he considered staying there, letting the darkness of the cave consume him. But then another thought surfaced. If he stayed, he would surely perish. The food he had packed was running low, and the air in the cave felt heavy and oppressive. Survival was not an option here. Summoning what little strength he had left, he forced himself to stand. His legs trembled under his weight, and every muscle in his body protested, but he knew he couldn't stay. "I have to go back," he whispered to himself, the words more of a plea than a command. As he stepped out of the cave, the daylight hit him like a wave, blinding him momentarily. He blinked against the brightness, taking in the forest once again. The journey back loomed before him, an insurmountable challenge in his weakened state. He hesitated, staring at the distant mountain he would need to climb once more to return to the village. For a fleeting moment, he considered giving up. "What's the point?" he thought. But deep down, something stirred. A small but growing resolve. He couldn't explain it, but the act of coming this far had sparked something within him, a strength he never realized he possessed. Taking a deep breath, he set his sights on the forest path and began the climb back toward the mountain. Every step was a battle against his aching body and the doubts that plagued his mind. He fell, he stumbled, and yet he continued, driven not by the diamond, but by a newfound determination to make it home. As he reached the base of the mountain, he looked back at the cave one last time. Though empty, it had left its mark on him. It was no longer just a place of disappointment. It had become a symbol of his perseverance. "Maybe the diamond isn't something you hold," he thought, as he began his ascent back to the village. Each step was grueling, but for the first time, he moved with purpose. Not for wealth, but for the realization that he was capable of so much more than he had ever believed. The sun was setting as the young man finally approached the outskirts of the village. His clothes were torn, his body bruised, and exhaustion hung heavy over him, but he had made it. Each step back felt like an enormous victory, though his heart still carried the weight of disappointment. As he walked through the village, people stopped and stared. Whispers of curiosity rippled through the crowd. The once lazy young man had returned from the mountain, battered but alive, a sight no one had expected. The monk was waiting for him beneath the same tree where their conversation had begun. His serene face lit up with a gentle smile as he saw the young man approaching. "Ah, you've come back," the monk said warmly, his tone calm and knowing. The young man's face was a mixture of anger and confusion. He dropped to his knees in front of the monk, the frustration he had been holding back spilling over. "Why did you lie to me?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "There was no diamond in the cave. I searched everywhere, and it was empty." The monk remained unflustered, his gaze steady and kind. "No diamond, you say?" "None!" the young man exclaimed, his hands clenched into fists. "I climbed the mountain. I endured the pain. I crossed the forest and risked my life. And for what? Nothing." The monk's smile deepened, a glint of wisdom shining in his eyes. "But my dear boy, you have found the greatest diamond of all." The young man froze, confusion etched across his face. "What are you talking about? I came back with nothing." The monk gestured toward him with a subtle nod. "Look at yourself. When I first met you, you couldn't be bothered to lift a finger. You lay beneath this tree, content to let the world pass you by. But now, you have climbed a mountain, crossed dangerous terrain, and endured hardship. You didn't give up, even when the journey seemed impossible. You have discovered diligence, perseverance, and strength within yourself. These are treasures far greater than any diamond." The young man's breath caught. He stared at the monk, his words slowly sinking in. "But I failed," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The monk shook his head. "Failure? No. You proved to yourself that you can face challenges and overcome them. The diamond you sought was never in the cave. It was inside you all along. The journey revealed it to you, and now you hold it in your heart." The young man felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, and a newfound understanding of himself. The anger and disappointment that had consumed him began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of gratitude. The monk leaned forward, his voice soft yet firm. "With this diamond of diligence, you can achieve anything you set your mind to. Wealth, success, fulfillment, these are all within your reach, but only if you continue to embrace the determination you've discovered." Tears welled up in the young man's eyes as he realized the truth in the monk's words. The journey had changed him in ways he couldn't have imagined. From that day forward, the young man was no longer the lazy dreamer under the tree. He worked tirelessly in the fields, earning the respect and admiration of the villagers. The mountain he had climbed became a symbol of his transformation, a reminder that the greatest treasures in life are often found not in the destination, but in the journey itself. From that day onward, the young man was no longer the lazy dreamer under the tree. He became a diligent worker, embracing life's challenges with renewed vigor. Laziness, as the story shows, is not an unchangeable trait. It is a hurdle that can be overcome. Often, it stems from a lack of purpose or motivation. The young man was content to do nothing until the promise of the diamond gave him a goal. Similarly, when we lack direction, we fall into the trap of procrastination. The tale also reveals another truth. We underestimate our own potential. The young man didn't believe he could climb the mountain until he did it. In the same way, we often hold ourselves back with self-doubt. Through diligence, we unlock our true capabilities and pave the way to a fulfilling life. The real diamond lies not in material wealth, but in the strength, resilience, and determination within us all. So let us embrace challenges, rise above laziness, and discover the diamonds that lie within.